Good evening and welcome to today's session on BIC streams in collaboration with the India Foundation for the Arts and the Association of Designers of India. A singular journey, the career and life of polymath and artist designer Riten Mozumdar. Joining us are our panelists, Ushmita Sahu and Mortimer Chatterjee. Welcome, Ushmita and Mortimer. Before I hand over to Arundhati Ghosh from the India Foundation for the Arts, a few quick instructions. For those of you who are here for the first time and may want to receive updates from us, you can do so by visiting our website, or you can follow us on our social media channels, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We will be sharing the full bios of today's panelists via the chat box that you can see at the bottom of your screen. You can type in your questions in the Q&A box, which is next to the chat box, again at the bottom of your screen. With that, welcome everyone, and over to you, Arundhati.
Thank you, Raghu. It's such a pleasure to be doing this collaboration with Bangalore International Centre again. Over the years, since the time Bangalore International Centre started in the city, the collaboration of IFA and BIC has helped us, enabled us to get so many conversations into the city. And today, because we're all online, these conversations can be accessed across the region. So thank you, BIC, for yet another opportunity to do that. As some of you know, India Foundation for the Arts is a nationwide independent grant-making organization. We support projects across disciplines in the arts, in research, practice, and education. And we support work that enables artists to pursue their dreams, their journeys, through various programs that we have. In fact, this happens to be the 25th year of our grant making. And just to give you an idea, there are over 600 projects that we have been able to support in these years. Now, one of our very important programs, almost a flagship program that IFA began making grants with, is the Arts Research Program. It has, of course, over the last 25 years, morphed and shaped into the program that is there today. And what BIC and IFA together are sharing with you is a project that was supported under the Arts Research Program. Now, as the name, it's evident, it's a research program through which we support both artists as well as researchers and scholars to critically inquire into those histories and vocabularies in artistic practice in the country that otherwise go unnoticed, that are unexplored yet, that do not often find a voice in the dominant narratives of loud noise that is there around us. And when we, as a team, looked at the project that you're going to listen to today from Ushmita and Mort, we were delighted because it was one of the first kind of projects that we found in design. And looking at Riten Mozumdar's work, who has sort of built between the 1950s and 1980s what modern design means in India. And we realized there's so little work that has gone into understanding the political, the cultural, the sort of aesthetics during this time, and how this enabled India to stand as a historical perspective, stand with what design means to us in the here and now. So we found it incredibly important. And that's the reason we supported the project. And we are delighted that Ushmita will share with us her project today, with Mort supporting the whole process and leading into the Q&A later. So Mort and Ushmita, over to you.
Arundhati, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Ushmita and I are incredibly thankful for the opportunity to present today around the life and legacy of Riten Mozumdar. Let me preface everything by saying that poor Ushmita is having some technical difficulties brought on by a storm in Shantiniketan, where she's based. As everyone can see, she's in beautifully lit candlelight at the moment. And we're going to work through those issues. I'm sure everything will be fine. Ushmita, can you hear us loud and clear?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Perfect. So let me just begin by saying a few words about Riten and Ushmita. Riten, of course, whose influence I think is still felt very much today, yet whose life is little known outside his own generation of cultural practitioners. Ushmita has dedicated now a number of years into looking deeply into Riten's life, and the outcome of this process is now that she really has emerged as the preeminent authority on Riten, and so it's a wonderful opportunity for her to guide us through his life and times. Chatterjee and Lal as a gallery has been fortunate to join Ushmita on this voyage of discovery, and this culminated in an exhibition that we hosted in the gallery earlier this year, more of which later. And as part of which in late February of this year, in fact, February the 29th, barely 2 or 3 weeks before the onset of the lockdown nationwide, we were able to put together a symposium in Bombay on the life and works of Riten with Ushmita, Nancy Adajania, Mayank Mansingh Kaul, which was a great opportunity. And now here we are 6 months later, where we have the opportunity of Ushmita now presenting to a virtual audience, which of course is the nature of our times. So the flow for today will be, I'm going to hand over to Ushmita very shortly, who will give us a presentation. Then she and I will talk a little bit more about certain aspects of that presentation. And then we'll throw the conversation open to the audience for Q&A. So Ushmita, I'm going to do the honors of presenting the PPT, yes, and you will talk around it. So should I open it up?
Let me just thank Arundhati, and I want to thank IFA and Bangalore International Centre for inviting me and Mort here today. As Mort has already said, that this is a real pleasure to be sharing this project that has been very important to me for the past several years. And Mort and I have also been collaborating to bring the exhibition to Bombay. We've been collaborating for over a couple of years at least. So I think, yes, today, as you can see, I'm sitting in darkness, in candlelight. So Mort will do the honors of sharing the slide. Mort, when I will ask you to go on to the next slide whenever I can move forward there.
Ushmita, just one thing I forgot to say, a very important thanks. So if I may just take a second.
Yes, please.
I would like to thank Titan, because Titan supported this grant and enabled us to support you. And this is also because Titan is very, Titan supports a lot of work in design. So to them, this project was specifically important because this is tracking a particular history of design in India. Thank you.
Right.
And sorry about missing it in my introduction.
So, Mort, let it be on this slide for a bit before I just set a background for the presentation. So what I'm going to share today over the next 25 minutes is a kind of a comprehensive look at Riten's journey from when he was a student in Kalabavan to when he turned back to Shantiniketan after having worked as a designer in Delhi and having had exhibitions throughout the world. So before we start looking into his work, it's also important to understand that how do we place Riten as a designer? Why is he important? What makes his practice so exemplary of the changes that were happening in a modernist India after independence. Because in that period, post-independence, India witnessed the rise of a kind of a new consciousness in modernist design, which was not just in what we understand as designing objects, but it was also evident in architecture, it was evident in literature, in films, and even in dance and performing arts. So these innovative breed of designers, they were engaged with changing the idiom based kind of a socialist ideology and a radical shift in India's nationalist program. And the trajectories that they adopted were eclectic in nature, and they looked beyond the colonial and the feudal influences, drawing inspiration from various traditions and merging it with the aesthetics which was secular in locus and in approach. And this happened because of the kind of political shift that took place. Nehru's vision of independent India and nation building sought to reconcile science and technology and modernization, while he also emphasized the revival of small rural and cottage industries. So this kind of a platform where there was a complex idea of what the nation was, especially after partition. It was in this kind of a milieu that these designers were working, designers like Riten Mozumdar, designers like Shona Ray, and Ratna Fabri. So he was, amongst these, then was a very important voice. Jaya Appasamy, she wrote about him that there are very few contemporary designers in India who can claim to have helped to create a modern taste. Riten Mazumdar is outstanding among them. So his contributions to the modernist aesthetics owed as much to his educational background, as much to the kind of changing socio-economic and political paradigms of the era, and to finding a new voice, a voice that would reflect this change. So having laid the basis, maybe we can now move on to the next slide more. So Mazumdar's schooling began in Shantiniketan. He received this education which can be unequivocally termed as the foundation on which he builds his subsequent career. He was product of a schooling, and this is very important because I personally feel that this influences his practice for his for the life to come, that this engagement with an heritage as well as the arts and crafts, which was very integral to what Tagore thought about education. And on the basis of this, he started his creative journey as a student. Next slide. So he studied under the masters Nandalal Bose, Babbage, and Vinod Bihari Mukherjee. And the latter became his mentor and taught him the fundamentals of contemporary art. And one can easily understand that these basics that he learned here in the beginning were to stay on throughout, because he always considered himself as an artist designer. So that is very important to understand. So the images that you see here are from his college days. On the top is a bas relief that he did in a class with Ram Kinkar Baij. And the two paintings that you see below are flower studies that he had done with Vinod Bihari. A mention of this is there in one of his memoirs, and it's called The Chalta of Flowers. So as many of you would know, that design was also introduced as a subject in Kala Bhavan. They had to work with designs and floral motifs. So this engagement with design was there in the beginning, but he wasn't very interested in it. In the beginning, Riten did not like these ornamental designs. But then he followed Binod Bihari, his teacher, to Nepal in 1948. Mort, maybe the next slide. So Binod Bihari joined as the museum curator in the Nepal Museum. And Riten Mozumdar and Binod's wife, they went there to study under a master craftsman, Kulasundar Shilakarmi. And it was here actually that Riten Mozumdar started to get interested in the various aspects of design making, traditional design making. So here you see various objects that he had made in his time there, which is a block making. So the image on the image number 2 is a block making. He did banner painting, wood carving, metal crafts, stone crafts. So all this developed an appreciation for the knowledge of indigenous crafts. Next. So after his training there for a year and a half, he came back to Delhi. He returned back to Delhi in 1951. And from there, he went on to Mussoorie with Binod Bihari, where he had started a summer school and block printing unit. Here, both teacher and students started creating original block printed material. And alongside, Mazumdar was also exhibiting in exhibitions. So here you can see he had exhibitions with his teacher, Leela Mukhopadhyay or Leela Mukherjee, and also with Ram Kinkar Baij in one instance. KJ Subramaniam, who was Riten's Mazumdar's dear friend, he said that, to quote him, that between 1949 and 1957, Mazumdar broke into the Indian art scene with an impressive spate of exhibitions of paintings and sculptures, singly or with others. Next. So by the 1950s, early 1950s, he was making sculptures in clay and wood, trying out making fabrics and fine hangings. As you can see, the cuttings from the Illustrated Weekly of India from 1954 says some new designs by Riten Mozumdar, a remarkable young textile designer who's a student of Binod Bihari. His works were also part of the Living India exhibition at MoMA, New York in 1953 and 54. And he was also commissioned to do several murals. Notable amongst these were the Khadi Village Industries and the Post and Telegraph Centenary exhibition in Delhi. You can see the long image on top. So after this, alongside this, he was also experimenting and designing for different crafts. He also had joined Indian Cooperative Union as an illustrator. Next. So his original vision and distinctive approach, where he was trying to work with traditional crafts. For instance, here you see the mother and child is a wooden toy. In Bengal, there is a tradition of these painted wooden toys. And on the right, you can see the Handicrafts of India book edited by Kamla Devi Chattopadhyay, in which it mentions the creations of Riten Mozumdar. These decorative pieces of human and animal employ a bold, stylized, almost cubistic form. So, so there is this idea of reviving older designs into something newer for the times. Next, please. So positive media reviews of his work helped Mozumdar gain a 2-year scholarship to study with the sculptor Boris Kalin at the Academy of Fine Arts, Ljubljana, Yugoslavia. He was there from 1955 to 56, and he trained in an academic style, which was a marked departure from his previous training at either Shantiniketan or in Nepal. So while he was in Europe, the art historian Stella Crambrish, who he had been introduced to Stella Crambrish by Abanindranath, still while he was still a student in Kalabhavan. And Stella Crambrish helped him to get another bursary from Giuseppe Tucci, an Italian scholar of East Asian studies, to visit Italy. Next. So after completing his studies, he traveled through Europe, through Italy, and then he made his way to Finland. And he was working in a company called Arabia, which was a Finnish ceramics company, when Armi Ratia, who was the founder of Printex Marimekko, as the company was then called, she heard of an Indian artist working at Arabia, and she went to meet him and invited him to work with Marimekko as a textile designer. So he worked with her for almost 10 months between 1956 and 57, making several original designs. So here on the image on your left shows Riten Mozumdar with Armi Ratia, with what I presume are the designs that either he carried with them or made there. Why I say this is because these designs are very reminiscent of Mazumdar's very famous teacher, Vinod Bihari Mukherjee. And the design on the right is from the archives of Marimekko, which they have kindly shared with me. This is one of the very first designs that he shared. And as you can see, the language is still ornamental and lyrical. Next. So these are the designs that he now creates there. And for me, they clearly demarcate a departure, both in perception and process. A move away from his earlier lyricism to a crisper, more minimal, pared down. Although a full-blown move towards abstraction would still take him some more years, but he was already absorbing Scandinavian design sensibilities. And also here, it is very interesting to see the hints that he gives. So the design on the left is Rajputana, and the one in the center is called Benu Bono. Benu Bono, which in Bangla means bamboo grove, was to remain an important element of his design sensibilities throughout. He made this for Marimekko, and he revisited this design in various different permutations throughout his career. The dress that you see on the right-hand side is a revival of the archival design by Marimekko in 2013. Next. So this is a very interesting grouping of images. The image on the top is called Jafri. This is a design that Riten Mozumdar made for Marimekko. And the design and the block that you see below is called Rome by Night, which he did much later after he had returned back to India. The image in the center is the Piazza della Civiltà Italiana, a building in Italy where obviously he had traveled through Italy and he had taken many, many photographs. And on the right is Monica Correa, whom he came to know after a couple of years. So she is wearing a sari designed by Riten Mozumdar using this block, and the block was called Rome by Night. So this kind of a narrative becomes very important to understand how and where the artist and the designer is influenced, how they see these imagery, carry it forward, and translates into their design sensibilities. So this, while Riten Mozumdar traveled through Europe, worked in Marimekko, and then he went to UK and the USA. He studied sculpture and ceramics. He had already learned the new technique of silkscreen with Marimekko. He visited museums, and then he returned to India in December 1958. And on the ship back to India, he met Charles Correa, and they forged a lifelong friendship. Monica Correa remembers that that friendship that was struck there on that ship led to a lot of collaborations, lot of talks about what exactly art meant, what exactly design meant. And together they both represented India at the World Design Conference in Japan in 1960. This photograph is from that conference. Mazumdar, his sister Chitra, her husband Jolly Barua, who was a designer, with Shilpi, and HHE, Charles and Monica Correa, they became a very close knit of friends. Next. So Charles Correa also designed Mazumdar's house in Delhi in 1972. These are images of his house taken by Madan Mahata, a very famous photographer who had photographed the modernist architecture of the time. Next. So after Mazumdar returned back, he started his own studio, Imprint. He started out of a garage in 1959, and within 2 years, he had advanced to an outlet in South Extension, where you can see the invitation opening there. And here he had a dedicated workshop. He had almost 30 employees, and crafted fabrics, dress material, furnishings, saris, household linen, and much more. And his work was sold through various outlets in India, such as the Central Cottage Industries, Cottage and Small Scale, Emporium, Chitra in Bombay, Bengal Home Industries, and even exported internationally to Liberties London, Ilams Bolliges Denmark, Design Thai Bangkok. And by 1969, he was a name to reckon with, and counted Mrs. Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister, amongst his clientele. What? Next. And how are we placed for time?
I think that we've 15 minutes, so another 10 minutes maybe. Yeah.
Okay. So this is one of the early silk wall murals that he had done for the Ashoka restaurant in Asia 72, New Delhi. Next. So throughout his long career, calligraphy and text held a great fascination for him. So we see numerous designs feature various adaptations and permutations of Persian, Tibetan, Pali, Devanagari, Sanskrit, Bengali, and other scripts, sometimes inspired by the Namavali Gamchas of UP and Bengal. He produced a series of designs. Next. So sometimes he would use images of ancient seals. As you can see on the left is the Barber's seal, which he enlarged to create a large silkscreen. Then he would hand paint, as you see in the scarf in the center. Or on the right is a dari where he incorporates various methodologies: block prints, silkscreen, hand calligraphy. Next. So these are some the saris and scarves again. So to understand the various methodologies that he was using, on the sari on top is hand painted, while the scarf in the middle has block prints, which he sometimes used to superimpose the same block or different blocks together to render the text illegible. And the scarf in the bottom has a silk screen print on it. Next. This is a bed cover, but very interesting because this actually was the backing cloth, or the cloth that is usually put on the table or over which the block printers print the cloth, and hence the ink bleeds onto this backing cloth. So then he did some more block printing and hand calligraphy over it, and this is a bed cover stitched in the middle. So it shows that for him, even the material that one would not necessarily look at uh, was something of beauty. Even his printer, whom I met in Delhi, told that वो बिल्कुल अलग सोचते थे, meaning that he thought in very different ways. He thought like an artist. That's what he said. Next. So between the 1960s and 80s, he was acting consultant to numerous public companies, of which prominent are All India Handicrafts Board, TARU, DCM, Handloom Board. But especially with India Handicrafts Board, he worked tirelessly to revive the Jali work from Saharanpur in UP and ivory inlay work from Hoshiarpur. And it's a very interesting thing that in his archives, I have found numerous photographs of architecture. So you see the Jali architecture on your bottom left, and then you see the dice, the metal dice that is used to draw these designs on the wood. So you can see how he's influenced by the architecture itself and how he's looking at these Indo-Islamic archway styles and using them into these chairs and tables. Next, please. So adding these hand-cut jali, so you must remember this is also hand-cut because he's after all working with traditional craftsmen. So hand-cut jalis incorporate or emphasize the light and shade, and these become an intrinsic part of the object, adding a quality of transparency. Next. He also designed a line of contemporary furniture, especially for Mini Boga's Taru, and also for his own label, which was made by his trusted carpenter Yasin. So his foray into furniture was again an experience in wood carving and sculpture, and these reflect noticeably Japanese Scandinavian influence, although at times he uses jute to weave the seeds, adding an indigenous twist. So his contemporary designs were quite indicative of the tastes of the time. Low seating, minimal lines, simple and fuss-free. But they also, to my mind, recall the Shantiniketan experiment in furniture design at the beginning of the century. More? Between 1972 and the late 80s, he collaborated with the important architects and engineers of the time working in Delhi, such as Jasbir Sajdev, Rosemary Eccleston, Ram Sharma, Rajinder Kumar, Raj Rawal, Ravi Sikri. He worked on several ITTC projects, and here you can see a couple of those. On the left are the silk wall murals for the Akbar Hotel, and the black and white images are the Ashoka restaurant in Bangalore. He also did projects internationally in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, in Nepal, and Thailand. Next. So some of his projects that he, between 1972 and 80s, he specially worked with Sajdev Eggleston Associates on several high-profile and award-winning projects. So on the left is the India Pavilion in International Trades Exhibition, Algiers. So these are very small photographs which have been blown up because, of course, it's very hard to come across archival images of the time because there's not much record. So the awning, the ceiling has been designed by him. And in the Chandigarh project, the awning and the one below right, the Osaka Expo 70 pavilion that he created a series of wall hangings in wool. Next. So these are two of his very, celebrated projects that he did with Sachdev Eggleston Associates. One is the BHEL Asia 72 Pavilion, for which he painted the awning, hand painted the awning with these very minimal designs, which at the time were kind of linked to tantric symbolism. And on the lower right, you see this project that he did for the Indian Engineering Trade Fair in 1975 in the erstwhile Hall of Nations, and where he made these massive mobile sculptures using wood, iron, plastic, which covered 20 meters in width and 12.5 meters in height. And it was written off at the time in the media as the world's largest mobile sculpture. So as you can see that he was collaborating with various engineers and architects, but he always had his whole design element was always integral to the project. He understood and displayed a very keen understanding of the possibilities of the material that. Next. So this is the Siri Fort Auditorium proscenium curtain. I was lucky to find this sole image. There's not many images of this because it was burnt down. In a talk, Mayank Mankal mentioned that it was a great favorite of Martan Singh, this design that he had done for the curtains. Next. So I now come to this very important, genre within his practice. He had worked for some time with traditional craftsmen who used to make these namdas, woolen rugs. And Mozumdar took this material and he gave a different uniqueness, a perspective. So he took this woolen rugs or carpets that were used traditionally as to cover the stone floorings, and he took these utilitarian objects and turned them into coveted pieces by using color as an element in its own right. Can we go on to the next slide? So see here,
and Ushmita, maybe another 5 minutes, and I think then we'll wrap up.
How many slides do we still have left? A few.
Still another 15 or so.
Okay, so maybe we can just quickly run through them. So here he's using dyes, he's using block prints and embroidery. Maybe you can just keep going with the slides and I can. So these became a collectible, they were very much in demand, and he had exhibitions throughout India. But the two important shows that he had were the one-man show of felted rugs in the Museum of Contemporary Crafts, New York, and the tie and dye printed rugs at the Museum of Decorative Arts. Do we have that slide? Next. His rugs appeared on the cover of important magazines. Next. Yeah, these are the vintage catalogs from his solo shows from New York, and one he was part of a group show. Next. So in addition to what he was doing, he was also designing garments, mostly for his label Riten, but also working with his friend Bharti Sharma, who labeled Pallavi. And these were exported to Middle East, Australia. Next, please. His clothing line were simple, striking, used dramatic geometric motifs to create a contemporary allure. If you see the image on the right and the one next slide, You will remember what I talked about, the Benu Bono design that he had done for Marimekko. So he was using, see here, this is a very simple technique he used. He made this block of bamboo reeds and he tied them up with thread, and he would dip this into the dye to create this amazing pattern. Next. So one of his most important associations was, and the one that he's actually most famous for or known for, is his association with John Bissell and Fab India, which began in 1966 and lasted until 2000. They were very good friends, and initially Bissell had asked him to create some paisley motifs. And when they were received very well, he gave Mozumdar a carte blanche to create a contemporary design line. Maybe we can go on to the next slide. So using symmetrical shapes in bold and colorful blocks and silkscreen, he created a line of household linen that became hugely successful and popular. I would like to quote Meena Chaudhary, who was the former chairperson of Pavilion, when she said, "Riten burst on the scene with his graphic designs, his bold colors, stark geometric statement, and I think that caught the imagination, particularly of the young. And these became so popular, they were knockoffs being sold in all the local markets, so much so that Fab India had to add a signature at one point. But I have an interesting, because whenever I've talked to people and I've seen whatever I've seen of his designs, they are of very minimal colors. So I have an interesting theory here that Riten Mozumdar actually was colorblind. He had been taught how to understand hues by his teacher Binod Bihari when they were in Nepal, but he could not differentiate between very many colors. So that is why I think his design, this did inform how he looked at color and how he limited his palette of design colors that he used. Next. So his designs were so popular and so influential that upcoming generation of designers, the kind of work that he was doing. As you see, he was written about in magazines, and he had a solo exhibition of his fabrics at the Jahangir Gallery in 1978. Next. So his work had such far and wide reach. On the left, the image that you see is from the Jeffrey Bawa house in Sri Lanka. His objects were collected, and you can see in the interior of Charles Monica Korea's home. Below in Ram Sharma's house, you can see the iconic cushions. They're like that you can see within that space. Next. That's an interesting slide. On the left is a still from Masoom. When I was I was watching this film a few years back, and I suddenly noticed the Riten Mozumdar cushions there. And the film is from 1983, so one can understand how popular these designs were and how they were reasonable. Fab India products were something that people could afford. And then you saw these in most homes. But the interesting part is the image on the right. This is something that I came across just a couple of days ago in a conversation with Mort. This is a still from the recent ongoing TV series by Meera Nair, A Suitable Boy. This is set in the 1950s and in the new nation. And as you can see, there are Riten Mozumdar designs on the wall, framed on the wall. But what I found interesting is that Riten Mozumdar's designs become indicative of new nation, but but actually these designs would correctly be dated to the 1970s. But I'm happy to accept him being uh, indicative of the new design sensibility of the era. Next. So we enter the last couple of slides. So he returned to Shantiniketan in 1988, and Vishwabharati invited him to take on the role of the honorary visiting professor. And while he was here, he started a series of painting on silk. And these paintings included textual excerpts from Tagore's poems. Next, please. So his conceptual intent of the use of text. So he was using text throughout his life. And now his intent for using text and calligraphy is not just a design element. I feel that by using some special poems from Tagore's oeuvre, especially poems which deal with a kind of a ethos dealing with the death, he kind of creates a murmuration of text. He creates this kind of an idea of infusing these texts with almost a conceptual extension of that somber feeling of the poems. Next. I end with a quote by Professor Ashok Chatterjee, who says documenting designs like Riten Mozumdar is critical to the understanding of contemporary Indian design, and that at the moment there is little or no or understanding awareness of what the pioneers did to open the space that newer generations now enjoy. Their sense of heritage is about the distant past, not the post period preceding the founding of NID.
Ushmita, thank you so much. May I stop the presentation at this point?
Yes.
So I'm very grateful for that extraordinary overview of Riten's career. And I've been looking at the questions that have been emerging, and I have a set of questions also. How do you feel about if I perhaps actually merge the questions chronologically? I'll tell you why, because there are questions about Shantiniketan, there are questions about his use of fabrics, and I also have questions chronologically. So why don't we pick up first on his Shantiniketan period studying in the 1940s.
Okay.
I have a question which is asking you to, and just hold these questions, a couple of questions at a time, asking you to explain a little more about the Shantiniketan furniture movement that you had mentioned earlier. And allied to that, I just wanted to know a little more, if you could expand a little bit about the kind of training that students were getting in Shantiniketan in the 1940s, and especially in relation to design, and perhaps in particular working with non-urban art practices.
Sure. I mean, we do talk about the revivalist policies of, the government policies of post-independent era, but much before Rabindranath Tagore, when he established his fine art school at Calabar, when he had in 1919, he had based, kind of taken influences from Bauhaus. So he believed that in any education system, to make it complete, there has to be kind of a looking at dialogues, the idea of universal, and his idea of East meets West becomes very important. Alongside that, he also wanted the revitalization of various traditional techniques. He believed that design of, especially, this idea was passed on to Nandalal Bose, who actually nurtured and formed Kala Bhavans. So they believed that, to look at the traditional techniques was also important. That is why this became a very, very important aspect of the whole education policy. And the Tagore household had always been involved with crafts in the early years of last century. They had designed clothes, they had designed furnitures, they had documented artistic and literary practices of rural Bengal. And they realized that these were not kind of practices that were separate, but they were part of the cultural heritage of the people. So in that sense, the idea of and then again also Tagore was very much influenced by the Far Eastern traditions. He had introduced in Sriniketan, which is the sister university, he had introduced several programs which looked at carpentry. He had invited the Swedish weavers and the Sloyd system. He had invited ceramists. So these kind of questions of design being part of the larger curriculum was already within that. And yeah, does that answer the question?
It does. No, I think that's great. And allied to that, I'd like to now just move on, a couple of years into the 1950s, late 50s, when he moves abroad for some time. And what I find extraordinary is if we think about parallels within the visual arts at that time, young artists like S.H. Raza or F.M. Souza, who also move out of India in the late 40s and early 50s to forge a new path in their own careers. Mozumdar is one of the rarities, I think, within the design community who kind of moves outside the country. Can you talk a little to really what you feel are the fundamental influences which he picked up in his time in Europe, and which of those influences do you really think made a lasting impact once he was back in India?
This is a very complex question to answer, in one single, to just pick one single thing, because as I am slowly getting to understand, it was many things, not just the milieu, the political milieu, or where he was coming from, the education that he had received in Shantiniketan. But if we do look into what he, what became important for him when he went outside the country, I think the new traditions of design making, and especially I think the minimal approach towards design, that I think he found a resonance with something that he had perhaps already encountered in Shantiniketan's idea of minimalism, which is a little different, but there was that ashramic idea of, being within nature, utilizing things that you found around you, or having a very simple life that you led. And I think he could make those connections to what he saw in the Scandinavian designs as well. I think also he was a sensitive person. He was looking at art as well, as I've seen from and you've also seen from diary entries that he had made. I think also that while he was in America at the height of abstract expressionism, and I can find resonances of that kind of minimalism within his rugs, within some of his calligraphic works. So these might be things that he picked up apart from the technical know-how.
Yeah. So now let's move Riten from Europe back to India. He begins his career in Delhi. Now if we can flesh out the personality a little bit of the man behind the works. I've got quite a few questions asking about his personal life. Who was he? Can you just give us a little brief insight into that part of his world, and maybe then also talk about his time in Delhi and that milieu within which he was functioning. You touched upon, of course, his relationship with Charles Courier, Ram Sharma, but I think he generally was seen as quite a pivotal character within that cultural scene in Delhi at that time.
Yeah. So what I found out is that he was shy. He was soft-spoken. He wasn't the kind to put himself out and to brag about his work. He was a very quiet sort who would always just talk through his work, and that's how his friends know him. But he did have a bit of a temper, but which was not shown all the time. One thing which everyone, his friends, his colleagues, people who came across him, one thing that everybody had to say was that he was the perfect gentleman. In every sense, he was a good man. He had a very good heart, and he was very helpful. There are, examples of him having gone out of the way to help people who might be almost his rivals in the design field. But he did not hold back on what he knew and what he wanted to share. Yes, and even when he returned back to Shantiniketan, uh, he spent a lot of time with young students sharing his knowledge. Yes, and he was also very finicky and particular. He wanted things in a particular way. Like Meena Chaudhary ji says that the designs that would come from the printers, he would go through each and every one, and they would, even if one had a tiny bit of what he considered error, would be rejected. So he was very particular about how he wanted to work. Yes.
Yeah. Well, allied to that point, maybe you could talk about his relationship to is there some interference on the line? Sorry. Maybe we can talk about his relationship to small scale production. In other words, where he's really watching every single piece of fabric being made and produced, and there's the element of the hand in that production versus then the mass production of his Fab India period. And maybe you could you just, I mean, obviously he's not with us anymore, but from what little we know of his writings and of his personality, to which area was he more drawn? Was it the small scale production, thinking as the artist, or was he happy and excited to be part of the Fab India movement, which of course is where most of us would have encountered the practice?
Yes. So looking at his practice and looking at the certain methodologies that he employs and the interests that he has, I feel that his practice lies within a very artistic studio setup. He believed in making things by hand. He created his own blocks before he printed his things. He did his own silk screen. If he was not satisfied, he would show things. And then there are the namdas. So each namda, even the piling of the felt, he would do by hand himself.
Ushmita, just tell us what a namda is for those of us who don't know.
Yes, so the namdas are the rugs, the woolen rugs that we saw. They are made of felted wool. So the technique is that you have to pile the wool together and using soap and water and use it together till it turns into a flat, dense kind of a felted piece. So he was doing all this, and that it's not an easy material to tie and dye, but he was doing that. He was not using any machinery or to bind these or color these. And also that he was incorporating the mistakes, I use the word mistakes, but these kind of impromptu things that would happen while he was working. So he was thinking like an artist, not like a commercial designer who had to mass produce something. But even when he worked for companies like Marimekko or Fab India, which were, of course, large-scale commercial productions, he was not involved in the financial aspect. He was involved more as the studio designer who would come in, who would make designs, who was in charge of the creative aspects. So then, and also he had a company imprint, as we know. He was employing around 30 people. He was very well known. He counted the who's who of Delhi amongst his clientele. I'm sure not just Delhi, but from beyond Delhi. But then he stopped it. Why? Because whosoever have asked, they say because he did not want to deal with the incessant demand of the client. So here you see he's kind of thinking like an artist. And
So,
yeah, sorry.
so can we talk a little more about this, about thinking like an artist? And let's talk a bit about his visual language. The idea of tradition versus modernity that runs right through the practice. I have a question just about his use of text, and in particular text which has perhaps a religious basis. Following on from that, of course, the tantric, and you touched on the idea of the tantric design. And then I have a couple of questions in the box, which are unsurprising, the relationship of Raza's aesthetic, the Bindu in particular, to what we see in some of the slides of Riten's work. And also some people have seen correspondences with work by people like K.G. Subramanian, or even the minimalism of Nasreen. So maybe if you could just take us through some of your thoughts about Riten as an artist, and of course we'll touch on the paintings as well a bit later.
Yeah. So maybe I can address the second part of your question first, this resonance of his work with other well-known artists. I think you mentioned Raza and Nasreen and K.G. Subramanian.
KG, yeah.
Yeah. So this comparison with Raza was a little bit of a sore point with him as well, because the works that you see, especially the works that he had done for the Ashoka restaurant in Bangalore, they are very, very similar visually to Raza's works. They have the large circle, which can be called the Bindu. It has also got texts from religious treatises there. But these predate Raza's by more than a decade. So in a sense, when he was doing this, Raza's Bindu works or Raza series were still to come after a decade. So that's why I think he kind of felt a little miffed when this comparison was made, even during his time. And I think also the fact that when any artist, for that matter, does work with very minimal forms, he is using very minimal geometric forms. He's using circles, triangles, lines. So this can lead to a comparison, as it was made in his time with tantric art, right? Because the tantric and the sacred geometric, ancient Indian sacred geometric arts do have that those kind of similar shapes and colors. But what we have to understand here is what is his concept? How is he coming from? Are the colors he is using because of his color blindness? Or there are so many layers.
Yeah,
but I don't think, I personally find there a resonance with Nasreen, but I think people are free to make their own interpretations.
Another comparison.
What,
oh, sorry. Sure.
Coming
please,
back to
please,
what
Ushmita.
About the religious texts, so when I first started to look at his work, I was amazed. I was really amazed by this use of texts, and he sometimes did mention in some interviews that these are for visual. These are visual appropriations. He's looking at design, the text as a design motif. But then it's also interesting that are these just an act of appropriation? Are these just texts that he's taking from religious or social or Buddhist sources? Can they remain apolitical within that that political scenario? But here is what is interesting, that he created these a decade after independence. It's around the 60s, and that the fact that he was able to create these images, and he was able to say that I do not have a political agenda, and that these were accepted and celebrated. They signify certain civil liberties of individual, of the mind, of the conscience, of society as a whole in turn. Yeah.
Another comparison, Ushmita, Tapati Guha Takuta has asked, and if I'm going to quote her exactly what she said, I wanted to ask Ushmita about the parallels between Riten's design over of the 50s and 60s, and Satyajit Ray's career as a commercial artist, book and poster designer in the same years, both coming out of the artistic mentorship of B.B. Mozumdar at Kala Bhavan. B.B. Mukherjee.
Yeah, I think both, so that both kind of a vastness of approach, whether in Satyajit's films, the way he creates his music, the way he designs his, he even creates each shot of the film, the way he creates his clothes, he employs the designs, how he designs, the costumes, the lights. I think all that is quite comparable in not the similar way, but quite comparable to the way Riten was also working across genres. He was making furniture, he was designing toys, he was doing his artistic practice in numbers. He was then designing clothes. He was doing these large-scale projects. I think it is more about the kind of freedom of education that they had received, the kind of almost how should I put it? The kind of, because there are stories of him having helped Ram Kinkar Bej to design, theater sets. He laments the fact that there are no photographs because, according to him, Ram Kinkar Bej was an amazing set designer, and he could use the almost the most simple objects to create a phenomenal stage set. He talks about the makeup that he would put onto the the theater players of the theater. So these kind of, I think these influences last you a lifetime and they guide you. I think that is where that similarity, that of thought, of that wideness of approach, I think would come in.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I take the liberty of sharing the screen now of the exhibition, which we hosted at the gallery, because that actually will also help talk about some of the other questions that we have.
Sure.
And in the meantime, I'm going to ask one more question. You've got to go into more detail about the color blindness, because I have 4 questions about the color blindness. And in particular, did the family has the family confirmed that he was colorblind? What does hues mean for a colorblind person? I had another one. If I find it, another, just please address color blindness.
Sure. So while you yeah. This anecdote about color blindness is I've heard it from Meena Chaudhary ji, because what happened was every time he would design something and they would get the prints, he would ask her that what is this color, what is this color, and this went on for some time. And she one day asked him, why do you keep asking me, whatever color you've given, we've done that. So then he said that, don't you know I'm colorblind? So she was quite shocked to know that he was colorblind. And also, his family, yes, his nephew has confirmed. He's also and sometimes does run in the family.
Yeah, actually, I can share one more. I have in the chat box, someone says, on his color blindness, I do have this sharp memory of him from my childhood. He's my granduncle, about how he could drive safely, not because he could see the colors of traffic lights, but because he could read the sequence in which they lit up.
Is that Arijit or Amit?
Raghu, you're going to have to tell me who that was. I've lost track.
Ushmita Mozumdar.
Oh, Anuhita. Hi, Anuhita. Yeah, so
I think that's really wonderful.
So actually, what he said, there's a small anecdote from his memoirs in which he says that in Nepal he was teased by a lot of his classmates. Sometimes there's a story where he was painting a landscape while he was a student, and he gets up and he goes And he comes back and he continues to paint, and he ends up painting the man green, because he does not understand that it's the green color. So he was teased. But later his teacher, Vinoda, he understood. And when they were in Nepal, he would bring in different flowers every day to make him understand the difference of hues. And he would study that. So he trained to understand hues. Yeah,
Right.
so maybe now we can look at the exhibition images.
Yeah, so I've gone on to the exhibition images. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk today, we had hosted a retrospective of Riten's in January 2020. Just to say that this exhibition was designed by an NID alumni, Aziz Kachwala, who tragically passed away within really a week of us finishing design for this exhibition. So it's dedicated to his memory. But the exhibition was a couple of years in the making, and Ushmita's research towards it was absolutely extraordinary, and I think forms much of the bulk of our discussions today. Ushmita, I'm going to use some of these images just to carry on asking you questions, if you don't mind, because we have still have a number.
Yeah.
You mentioned in terms of his furniture that the Japanese and Scandinavian influence, and the question really refers to where that influence may have come from in his practice. Do you think it is his trips to Japan in the 60s or the Osaka conference in 1970? Or do you think that there was generally a Japanese influence within India around that time?
I think it's possibly, again, it's not just a one-line answer that I can give. Of course, as I did say that, he had studied in Shantiniketan. He had seen the furniture here in Shantiniketan, which were influenced by Far Eastern traditions. Then he goes to Scandinavia. Also around the time, if you remember, there was an exhibition of European and American designers in Delhi, which brought in a lot of the important designs, and which later became kind of a seed collection for NID. So it was, I think there were several influences, and I'm sure when he was traveling and when he lived, he would have seen things around him. And also in Japan, some of his works that he designed for All India Handicraft Boards were also shown in Japan. So there was also this give and take. It's not always, just one way. It's an international give and take that goes on. It's a time where a lot of cross-pollination is going on, and we can't really say that this is just one particular way that he's influenced. Yeah.
Another influence question for you, Ushmita. I don't know what your feeling is. This is about the Fab India years. I'm intrigued by the titles Target and Union Jack for the cushion covers. Did he at any point take any interest in American pop art? The person, Shukla, this is Shukla Savan, comments, Rauschenberg made fabrics in Ahmedabad. Was there any interaction?
I haven't come across any interaction. I am not sure whether he had any interactions with Rauschenberg or whether he did see, because as you understand, this is still going on, the whole research. But I will definitely say that he may or may not have had a hand in naming all the works, because he would design, and sometimes, as Meena Chaudhary has said, they would all take turns to give names to some of the designs. So I'm not sure whether he did have, but having said that, I definitely feel he was influenced by in some manner, even if it is not direct, by the abstract expressionists.
question just about, do we know anything about his ceramic making?
That is something that I am trying to unearth. A couple of people here and there have said that he did make them, and there is a record in one of the biodatas that he had written by hand that he had done ceramics. But
yeah,
unfortunately, no photographs or no pieces as of yet. So
yeah.
I'm putting it out there. If anybody knows anything, please get in touch. I'm open to, listening to any stories, any material about Riten Mozumdar.
Ushmita, can we talk about the paintings now? Something
Yeah.
we've not touched upon so far. In 1988, he moves from Delhi back to Shantiniketan, perhaps at the urging somewhat of K.G. Subramanian, as you said, his great friend. And he proceeds on this extraordinary journey with painting at the end of his career, indeed the end of his life. Could you, I've got some images of the works up at the exhibition, which were displayed at the exhibition. Could you maybe just run us through the works, their meaning, the text-image relationship?
Yeah, sure. So what he does is very interesting. When he returns back, he starts this whole series of paintings, but he does not look at using canvas or paper. He goes back to the materials that he's confident of, that he has used throughout his career. That is cloth. Here in this case, they're mostly silks and acid dyes. So he also uses calligraphy, and the technique that he uses is this double image. So he creates this kind of double image by using two brushes together. So what would happen was that one brush was loaded more with color than the other, and when he would write, he would create a ghost-like, second layer of text. So these are then this series, as Dinanta Balai series, because quite a few of them, as I think mentioned earlier, were taken from various Tagore poems like Dinanto Belai Shishir Foshol. There was Amar Matha Noto Kore Dao, Amar Bela Jijai. So there are these 6 or 7 poems that he keeps coming back to, Dinanto Belai being the one that he uses the most. And as you can see, they are very sparse. Here, the text itself becomes a visual, and the way he uses these almost groupings of texts creates this, how should I say, it's almost like the text has taken flight. There's a sunset, and the text becomes like this murmuration of birds flying away. At least that's what I feel whenever I look at them. So
Beautiful.
they're all
Absolutely.
about sunset, they're all about this end of the day. So in a sense, perhaps because he had come back and he was leading a very a lonely sort of a life, which was the contrast to his very cosmopolitan life in Delhi, where he had a lot of friends. Here also he had friends, but Shantiniketan life in general is very quiet. So perhaps he became, more philosophical. He was reading a lot, and maybe he was thinking of the conceptual, the meaning of Tagore's poem, and that's how he was interpreting these.
Yeah. So here we have the paintings. We've seen we've had a run through of much of the design practice as well. What's your sense in terms of his legacy and the influence that he plays on the contemporary art, visual arts, and the contemporary design world? Is that influence felt, do you feel? Being completely modest as always, do you think this exhibition and your research have you seen an upswing in interest in Mozumdar over the last couple of years?
I think definitely. I mean, it's really sad that outside of Shantiniketan and maybe some friends here and there, not many people really knew about his practice. In fact, when I first approached his practice, I approached it via his paintings. That's what I knew of. I knew a little bit about his Fab India work, but then slowly over the years, as I started, almost peeling away the layers, I realized the breadth of his practice. And I realized at every turn the importance of what he has done and what the contribution he has made to the design histories of India. How his design kind of changed or showed the path for the next generation of designers who came in, whether it was block printing or whether it was how he approached this whole idea of bringing in a designer collection to a commercial outlet. But I think a lot more has to be done to make. And I'm so thankful to you for agreeing to do this exhibition, and I'm also thankful to IFA for giving me an opportunity to continue with the research, with the aim and hope of writing, having a publication on his work. We really need to get the word out there to show his work to more and more people, so that people understand he was not just a designer as he was bracketed within his time.
Yeah.
He was a polymath in the true sense. And it's unfortunate because we don't have textile fabric arts as a very important genre within our country. It's always growing, but at his time it would not have been at all. But look at the work of Annie Albers. You don't think of her as a textile designer, you think of her as an artist. So in that sense, his work is extremely important, and there needs to be a lot more dialogue about it. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's evident in the Q&A today that you can see people grappling with trying to come up with a nomenclature for this practice because it's so diverse. People are saying, is he an educationist? Is he a designer? Is he an artist? Is the influence coming from East Asia? Is it coming from Japan, Scandinavia? So I think all of this kind of multifaceted nature of Mozumdar just, I think, shines through to whoever is exposed to the practice. Sadly, sorry.
Can I make one more point here? It's also
Ushmita,
the
of course, the floor is yours.
The time where he's working. Now we understand designers as, you are either this designer or that designer. You have certain areas that you specialize in. But at the time he was working, this was a nascent field. Everybody did everything. There was no interior designer. Yeah, there were no, particular kinds of designers. One had to make do with what you had, and one had to make the best of all the opportunities, and you could work across genres. And I think that's what is so fascinating about his practice, that I don't think right now any designer would be able to, do this kind of a wide variety of practice, and that too on their own, without having an atelier taking care of the things. Yeah. And in that sense, he works like an artist.
Yeah, but I think we should also say that, of course, there were others during that time who were also multifaceted. We're neither of us are saying that it was only Riten Mozumdar. In fact, before the solo or the retrospective of Riten, we had an exhibition 2 years ago where we looked at the intersection between the design community and the visual arts community during this period, and in particular with reference to the Weavers Service Centre and to the National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad, and looked at some of the key players within that milieu, people like Haku Shah, people like KG Subramanian, Prabhakar Barwe. So I think it's important that we contextualize him within that group.
Yes, of course. I mean, he was, of course, not the sole, designer by any chance. There were so many others. It's also interesting that you brought up Weaver Service Centre and KG Subramaniam. There's an interview by Manida, as we call him here in China, on YouTube, in which he mentions that Riten had actually, Riten knew Kamla Devi Chattopadhyay and Pupul Jaikar. And I think he was offered this job on Weaver Service Centre, but he was actually leaving for Yugoslavia at that point. So because they were friends, so he created a meeting between Pupul Jaikar ji and Manida. And that's how Manida came to work.
That's how Manida, amazing,
yes.
Amazing. Ushmita, I think we're going to have to close this session. We're so thankful, of course, to everyone who's remained with us for the full 1.5 hours. You touched upon the fact that your work and research with the IFA continues, that you mentioned perhaps there's a catalogue, a publication in the works, which is really exciting. I'm going to ask you just to finish off if there's any more words you'd like to say about the IFA involvement, but beyond that, I'd just like to thank everyone.
Thank you so much. And I think I would absolutely like to mention IFA and the support, and also within the IFA grant, one of the things that one of the things that I wanted to do was take the word around. So I have been doing this series of lectures. I think you mentioned the lecture that I was part of at the G5A in Bombay on 29th of February. After that, I gave a lecture at the MS University, Baroda, and then at the NID and at Kala Bhavan. And I think I was supposed to go to Bangalore and have this talk at Bangalore in April, but now we are all here together. So I think, yes, this is, thank you so much for this opportunity to share my research with everybody here.
Thank you, Ushmita and Mort, for holding our attention amazingly over this evening. It's such a world of insight you've given us into the history of design, into the life and work of a particular person. It just, the institutions, the choices he made, it's just like, it's huge. And I hope you are able to do many more talks like this, but also from Bangalore and from all of us here. And because IFA is based here, I hope you'll be able to bring the exhibition here at some point, Mort and Ushmita, both of you. Yeah. And thank you, BIC, again. Thank Titan for supporting this work. And yeah, thanks to the audience for, I think I've never seen a conversation where there were like over 30 questions, I think. It was amazing. Thank you for being so engaged. Thank you. Any parting?
Yes, thank you, Ushmita and Mortimer. That was absolutely fascinating. And
my electricity is back.
Yeah, I think as approval, yeah, and opening us to such a diversity, of Riten's work and life, and it was very inspiring. So thank you, audiences, for joining us today, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.